World War I left long-lasting effects in Europe. The most devastating effect was in the massive loss of life. 14 million were killed and 7 million were disabled. Resources, manufacturing, agriculture, and currency were in ruins. Imperial governments and monarchs came crashing down. The Austrian-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Tsar, and the German Kaiser were all dissolved and deposed. The victors took on the responsibility of trying to figure out a way to piece this all back together.
The new era of peace in the world would be forged at the Paris Peace Conference. On November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m., an armistice was declared that officially ended World War I. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, both sides laid down their weapons. Fun fact, this is why we celebrate Veterans Day every November 11th. President Wilson immediately pushed his plans for a lasting peace. Steeped in his moral diplomacy, he believed the United States should lead the way as the largest democratic power in the world. We had a moral obligation to lead the world into this new era. In 1919, Wilson traveled to Paris to the peace talks at the Palace of Versailles. He would become the first sitting president to travel to Europe. Upon his arrival, Wilson was greeted as a hero by the Europeans. The French put out signs, had parades, and threw rose petals at his feet.
At the Paris Peace Conference, Wilson and the victorious Allied leaders led talks as the Big Four. The United States, Britain, France, and Italy dominated the talks. Russia wasn't present due to the perceived threat of communism, and Germany wasn't invited because they were blamed for the war. Opinions of the Big Four varied on how to reach a lasting peace. Some wanted to severely punish Germany for the war and its effects. Some wanted to show leniency as to ease the healing process and nurture them back into a peaceful world.
Despite the opinion of the other Allied victors, President Wilson submitted a plan for peace that he had designed. He believed that punishment would only hurt the chances for a lasting peace, and therefore favored leniency towards Germany and her allies. His plan focused instead on cooperation, recovery, and order. This plan would become known as the 14 Points. The first 4 points of President Wilson's plan focused on open diplomacy, which would eliminate secret alliances, freedom of the seas, which would eliminate the threat of naval conflict, free trade, and disarmament of countries everywhere around the world.
Wilson's fifth point proposed a fair voting system on settling conflicts over colonies, which would ease competition between superpowers when debating over colonies.
Points 6 through 13 dealt with the rights of people to decide their own political systems. When the major European empires were divided up after the war, many subjugated peoples wanted to make their own new nations. Wilson felt it important to include the rights of these people in deciding what kind of political system they would determine for their own country.
Wilson's 14th point proposed a League of Nations, or a Council of Nations, to settle future disputes and ensure peace. Think of a table that all nations could sit around and discuss their problems instead of fighting wars. Wilson's idea was if we could talk about disputes, we wouldn't have to kill each other over them, therefore ensuring world peace.
In 1919, at the Paris Peace Conference, the Treaty of Versailles, the treaty that officially ended World War I, was drawn up. The treaty had many key provisions. It included the War Guilt Clause, which forced Germany to assume full blame for World War I. It also forced Germany to pay back $33 billion in reparations to the Allied powers for all the damage and death caused by the war. It also forced Germany to reduce its military to 100,000 troops and to militarize territories and colonies everywhere around the world to help prevent Germany from starting another war.
It also outlawed the making and importing of arms in Germany. Essentially, Germany was not allowed to make weapons. It also formed the League of Nations. And finally, it created new democratic nations from the losers' territories, creating new countries in Europe. These countries included Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary.
President Wilson returned to the United States with the Treaty of Versailles in hand. However, in order for the United States to officially approve it, the Constitution dictates that the Senate had to ratify the treaty. At the time, the Republican Party was in charge of the Senate, and the Senate Majority Leader, Henry Cabot Lodge, strongly opposed U.S. involvement in the League of Nations. He feared it would pull the United States into any future European conflicts. After the war, many Americans were in favor of American isolationism. Shortly after returning from France, President Wilson suffered a debilitating stroke. Unable to rally people to the cause of ratifying the treaty, and unwilling to compromise with the Republicans in the Senate, the U.S. Senate rejects the Treaty of Versailles because of the League of Nations.
Despite the fact that the United States did not ratify the Treaty of Versailles, it still took effect in Europe. The treaty was full of weaknesses. Without the United States membership, the League of Nations was weak and ineffective. It never truly became this international negotiating body that Wilson had planned. With a devastated economy, Germany could not pay back its war reparations. The war guilt clause made Germans resentful of the rest of the world. They did not feel that they deserved blame for the war just because they were not victorious. When drawing lines for new nations, the Big Four didn't consider ethnic and cultural rivalries. For example, in Czechoslovakia, the Slavic people and Germanic people were put together when they actually hated each other. And finally, if a nation violated the treaty, there was no way to punish them, allowing nations to do as they please without fear of consequences.
The Allied powers win World War I, but the peace is incomplete. The many weaknesses of the Treaty of Versailles set the foundation for the future conflicts to come. In the decades ahead, ambitious men will use the scars of the First World War and the power at their backs to exploit the vulnerability of the treaty itself, leading to the greatest conflicts the world has ever seen.
Es lebe Deutschland!